I don't know. I heard a whispered comment about the preachership. There's any number of jokes that could be made about that, relative to hot air and all kinds. I'm sure there's so many things that could be said about that. Uh, so, uh, um, uh, but it put in my mind that we're going to be coming through the end of Ezekiel here, hopefully with a pretty wet sail. Um, and if you've read what is ahead, you'll kind of know why. Does anybody know the meaning of that idiom, coming home with a wet sail? No, you don't. Nobody knows that. All right. So coming home with a wet sail means the wind catches on a wet sail better than it catches on a dry sail, and so you come home faster. All right. If you read ahead in Ezekiel, you'll know that you might have even been fearful. Is he going to make us read this? And there will be portions that I'm going to ask the question: do you want to read it? Because we're about to be given maybe I imagine the engineers will want to read it because we're being given a blueprint for the temple. And there's this many cubits and that many cubits and that many cubits and that many cubits and that many cubits and this many cubits. And so, I don't know. We'll let the mob rule here as far as whether we will read all of those things. But the question is, what's happening? What's going on in all of these verses? So you notice I put these chapters in a unit, chapters 40 through 42. Because basically the same thing is happening in all three of these chapters. And they are the beginning of a section, though, that we do have to spend a little bit of time introducing. So what's happening in chapters 40 through 48? To appreciate what we're about to see, we've got to stop and think about what we've seen. So I'm going to start back as far as going to chapter 25 and give you just maybe one-liners to remember these chapters by and to see the overall picture of what God's been doing in this teaching, and then what he's going to do in the chapters that will conclude this book. So in chapter 25, if you remember, we left off in chapter 24, Jerusalem's destroyed. And so what do God's people need to hear first? They need to hear that judgment is universal. They haven't been singled out by God. There are other nations that are surrounding them that are going to be judged for their sins. And so chapter 25 is the reminder of that. However, there are specific passages of judgment about two countries. Does anybody remember, again, those two countries that God singles out for 3 and 4 chapters apiece to talk about the judgment coming to them? All right, was that Tyre, which of course is part of Phoenicia, and Sidon gets brought up, so that's why we say that. Tyre is the focus, but still Phoenicia, and then Egypt, right? And so when we think about the judgment of Tyre and why God would highlight that in particular, we reflect upon the fact that hope isn't found in wealth. They were an incredibly wealthy nation, and had only thought of Israel's fall in terms of their profit. And so for these and other things, God is going to bring them into judgment. And in bringing judgment upon them, Israel's reminded wealth isn't the answer. But power also isn't the answer. For forever and a day, there's been a perceived security in Egypt. Even from the time of, as we talked about this past Sunday, even from the time of on the way to the Red Sea, after the Red Sea, already God's people were looking back at Egypt and thinking there were better things back there. And that's kind of the story of the Old Testament almost. There's better things back in Egypt. This is a strong, stable, secure nation, and there's good things in Egypt. Well, there's not. Even though there's perceived power in Egypt, that power is going to be found wanting when Egypt itself is judged along with its celebrated Pharaoh, as there's a chapter dedicated to his judgment as well. Hope isn't found in these things, but hope can be found. So the question gets asked in chapter 33, why will you die? Well, why would they die? Why would Israel die? Why does anybody die? Wages of sin is death. It's not a hard answer. So that they will die because they are in their sins, but they don't have to remain in their sins. And so Ezekiel's reinvigorated. He says, God says once again to him, you're a watchman. You need to go out and warn people again, because maybe with these changes of events and maybe with the message you're now preaching, maybe some people are ready to change. Sin is still a problem. Yeah.
Us this Sunday is invite someone.
Yeah. So perfect lead-in. If maybe that's not the invitation you'll give. Why will you die? But it might be a good conversation starter. Just remember this Sunday. It is a great opportunity because we are going to be sharing a meal together after services, but also the lesson's going to be evangelistically oriented, getting people to see the value of the Bible and kind of a little bit of a primer on why it's worth listening to. So be sure to keep that in your thoughts and prayers as well. But hope can be found. So in chapter 34, God is going to seek them out. That's very hopeful. But in so doing, he's going to do what hasn't been done. They haven't been well led. Their shepherds are to blame. God says, I'm going to judge the shepherds, but then I'm going to come as a shepherd. And a beautiful prophecy or thought is contained in that. God is going to seek them out. He's going to judge those who mock and remove Israel's shame. There's reasons why they are subject to mockery, but those reasons are going to be dealt with, and the shame is going to be removed. But along these lines, over and over again, there's still this reminder throughout these verses of what is said in chapter 33, that there's still sin that needs to be dealt with. That's going to be a message that kind of goes through the end of the book. Chapter 37, God is going to bring a united nation of Israel, Judah and Israel, back to life. The two sticks are going to be one, and the valley of dry bones is going to come back to life again. So, yes, they're back to life, but what about their enemies? Well, their enemies are going to be defeated. The enemy that stands in the way through that, figure of Gog and Magog, anything that stands in the way of God's hopeful future is going to be dealt with. And so that brings us now to where we are in chapter 40. And you've thought about this restoration from a few different angles, therefore. You've thought about the universality of judgment. You've thought about what can't be trusted and who can be trusted, and that God can be trusted, how God's going to seek them out, bring them back to life, feed them, and so on. But where is God? And where was he before? So where is God? Or more specifically, where isn't that he was before? Remember the temple, right? So you remember how earlier in the book, as Ezekiel was taken on that tour of Jerusalem and shown all the many abominations that weren't just among the people, they were in the very temple itself. What happened at the close of that vision? What did God do? God left. So yeah, we're a nation brought back to life. We're a nation who's winning victories and all these other things that we've talked about in these chapters of hope. But God's not there. What does it matter? So effectively, what we're going to see in chapters 40 through 48 is that God's going to come back. That's the long and short of this portion of the book of Ezekiel. God is going to come back. But God coming back is conditional, and God coming back also is specific. So we're going to get a insight into both things as we think about all that's said in these chapters. So one continuous vision, mostly of a city and its temple, although there are sections dealing with sacrificial system stuff and land allotment stuff and so on, but mostly a city and its temple are in view in these 9 chapters. At the heart of the text, as I've already said, is a truth. God is going to return and dwell amongst his people. So that's what's been lost is going to be restored, and for those of us who understand the New Testament fulfillment of all this to a greater degree. But what do we do with the material here, though, is the question. So commentaries are actually divided on the significance of the temple and the city that Ezekiel sees. There's some aspect of these in the following chapters that are very, very clearly figurative. And so it doesn't fit neatly into really any category. And the categories that people basically try to fit these 9 chapters into are either one, we'll try to squeeze it into something entirely about the restoration that took place in the Old Testament under Ezra, Nehemiah, and so on. That doesn't work, and we'll say why in just a sec. They try to fit it into something that entirely talks about the church age, and that doesn't fit, and we'll talk about why in just a second. And then they try to fit it into some kind of future age. That's more something that comes up amongst our denominational friends, especially those who believe in premillennialism. If you've ever familiar with that belief system, a fairly novel belief system in terms of Bible interpretation, like in other words, pretty new, and also one that has many, many difficulties that we're going to really kind of dismiss outright. Still, we gotta ask these questions. Is Ezekiel referring to the church? Is he referring to the restoration of the temple in Ezra? And maybe the answer to those 2 questions is yes. Let's talk a little bit about it. So, in the vision, there are some things that just don't match reality, and some are just not feasible at all. So the idea that the thing that those who really put this into the future kind of demand of the text is that all this is going to literally play out. We're going to have a temple built to these specifications. It's going to be in Jerusalem. and we're going to have all the things that's talked about in this section of Scripture. All that's going to happen. Well, you'll note in reading these chapters that among the other things that are talked about, like you have the restoration of animal sacrifices. It's like, what's the point of that? And there are various, kind of not very good reasons why they say that those things are going to come back. But what do we think about that in terms of animal sacrifices coming back in the future at some point? Yeah, that's basically saying Jesus isn't good enough. And that's the exact opposite of the message of the book of Hebrews. One sacrifice for sin forever is the message of Hebrews as relates to Jesus. So the things that also, as you think about in terms of it having like a near future fulfillment, in terms of it being something that Ezra and Nehemiah and the returned captives did, they didn't use this text as a blueprint. So like they didn't try to build the temple, that the second temple was not built to these specifications. And in fact, some of them don't really work and aren't real, and again, we'll be highlighting a couple of things in some examples. The temple is located on a very high mountain. If you know anything about, like if you have a topographical map of the Bible world, what do you notice about Israel? What aren't there? There aren't any very high mountains. And then even if you think about the Temple Mount, you know that the Temple Mount is 300 feet shorter than the Mount of Olives. It's not even the highest little hill amongst all the hills there in Jerusalem. So, that doesn't really fit reality. There's also a river that flows out of this temple from underneath the temple that gets deeper and deeper as it goes on. Rivers do that. There's no mention of another supply of this river. And yet again, there's no river that flows out of Jerusalem. So it doesn't fit reality. The tribal allotments don't match the topography of Israel. So it doesn't fit. So like I said, the exiles never saw this as a blueprint of what they were supposed to do. They didn't treat it like that. So also, though, some aspects of this text just don't work with the Christian era either. So as we think about, what the text has to say, there are some very clear instructions as relate to animal sacrifices, mentions of the Aaronic and Levitical priesthood. Why is that a problem for us in the New Testament today? Jesus is our high priest, and he is from what tribe? Tribe of Judah. Can a priest from the tribe of Judah serve alongside of a priest from the tribe of Levi? No, why not? There had to be a change of the law to even have a Judean priest, right? So the law, the law that institutes Jesus' priesthood is not the law of Moses. If the law of Moses is still in effect, Jesus can't be a priest, and he's actually sinning by trying to usurp the priesthood. There was a guy who tried, even from the standpoint of being in the tribe of Levi, he tried to change his job within the tribe of Levi, and God didn't deal very kindly with him. Does anybody remember that man's name? Korah. Remember Korah's rebellion in the book of Numbers? So Korah was like, Moses, you try to do too much, and he tried to shift the priestly responsibilities to others in the Levitical tribe, and God said, no way. In fact, Korah found his way in the earth's core. Earth swallowed up. Well, I think the people in the rebellion, I think he got burned up, but I think, the earth opened up and they were, anyway, never mind. So Old Testament, that's too dark, too soon. Old Testament festivals are talked about, a physical temple is talked about, and temple worship and tribal allotments. None of those have anything really to bear upon the Christian age. So, you could argue that all of them, you really wind up distorting things because there's some things that really seem pretty black and white about what the exiles returned were supposed to do, and maybe messages for them in all of this. So again, some reflections on this. One, this vision is tied back to what else has happened in this book. So chapter 43, someone read Ezekiel 43 and verse 3 for us.
appearance of the vision which I saw, like the vision which I saw when I came to destroy the city. The visions were like the vision which I saw by the river Kibar, and I fell on my face.
Yeah, and note for New King James users, instead of when I came, when he came is how that reads in a lot of our other translations. That's probably the idea. When God came and destroyed the city. So he's relating what he's seeing now, what he's seen previously in the book. And what do we think about what he's seen previously in the book? What have we gotten used to? How is he communicating in these other visions? Do you remember the kind of language that we are, or the kind of the genre of material that we're talking about? Starts with an A. Yeah, apocalyptic, which is what? Yeah, symbolic language designed to communicate a needed message in a way that protects that message from those who could bring harm to its recipients, right? So it's the code that the prisoners of war develop in order to communicate what they need to communicate. So that's what we've seen at play in the entire book of Ezekiel. Stands to reason that there's going to be some of that in this section because, again, Ezekiel's relating it to where he's used that language in those visions previously. So what is happening, though, number two, in terms of an important reflection, what is happening in the near future, the restoration to Jerusalem and the Second Temple, relates to the distant future. You can't have Jesus born in Bethlehem of Judea if there is no Bethlehem of Judea. There has to be a return in order for there to be a fulfillment of all that God has promised and prophesied. So that's why I said, is this talking about the restoration of Ezra and Nehemiah? Yes. Is it talking about what God will ultimately do in Jesus? Yes. And there's an overlap between these two things. There's almost like, as you're thinking about the God allowing Ezekiel to cast his prophetic eye over the future, you know how sometimes you can see two like distant hills, and from your perspective, it seems like they're like one on top of the other. But if you were to be on that hill over there, there might be a deep valley between that one and the next one. You ever had that experience before? I kind of think that's what happens sometimes in prophecy, that when the prophet is looking forward, he sees the picture, and really there's two things that are different on display, but he's being allowed to see it as though it's one picture. And so don't expect for it to neatly divide, for these chapters to neatly divide into either all about the exiles returned or all about the church. But where it really doesn't make sense, again, is when we try to push it all to the future, something that God's going to be doing on earth in literal ways. So it's not literal as relates to the near future. It's not literal as relates to the distant future. There's good reasons to say, both of those things. But then again, Jewish or restoration under Ezra and Nehemiah or Christian, I would say there's elements of both of those things. Anybody have any other thoughts or reflections there that share? So what else is happening here? Well, when you're thinking about some of the things are really, like I said, there are aspects of this reading that are like nuts and bolts stuff from the law of Moses. And it almost makes me think that at least a part of the function of these chapters is also serving as kind of another repeating, a restoration of the covenant so that people can get back on the same page again. What is Deuteronomy? Does anybody know what the word Deuteronomy means? What's that? Yeah, well, there's the deutero part of that, which means second. The word nomos is the word for law. We actually take our title for Deuteronomy from the Greek language as opposed to Hebrew, and so it means like second law. And but is it a second law? Is like a new law? Second giving of the law with different emphases, right? or whatever, But I did that purposely. But like Moses is putting different emphases on the second giving of the law than he did in the first giving of the law. And that's why what comes up in Deuteronomy that really isn't emphasized as much in the first giving of the law. When you think about the great commandments of the law of Moses, where do you find them? Deuteronomy. That like the love aspect of the law is touched on a whole lot more in Deuteronomy than it's touched on in Exodus and Leviticus. So anyway, there's definitely, like I said, some stuff that really does seem to be nuts and bolts that won't be so much in our focus in these 3 chapters. So Ezekiel 40 through 42. Got a decision to make, everyone. All right, it's going to come up really quick here. All right, so be thinking. I want to read all of it. All right, you tell me. All right, but anyway, we'll have a couple of short readings first. So Ezekiel is caught up in a vision and is taken to Israel, and he sees a man with a reed. Let's read about that in the first couple of verses here. Verses 1 through 3.
Beginning of the year, on the 10th of the month, in the 14th year after the city was taken, on that same day the hand of the Lord was upon me, and he brought me there. In the visions of God, he brought me into the land of Israel and set me on a very high mountain, and on it, to the south, there was a structure like a city. So he brought me there, and behold, there was a man whose appearance was like the appearance of bronze, with a line of flax and a measuring rod in his hand, and he was standing in the gateway.
All right. So, what is so the measuring rod is interpretive. As I mentioned, it's a reed. It's something that they use for measurement, right? And actually, a little cool thing that you may or may not be aware of. Does anybody know what the word is that describes why the books in the Bible are the books of the Bible? What that study is called? Yeah, urban armaments or canonicity. Canonicity. You never forget it now, hopefully. Did anybody get that? Nobody got it? Urban armaments, canon city. Ha 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 ha. All right. Yeah. I think that's a pretty good one. I like that one. But yeah, so canonicity is what the study of why the books that are in the Bible is called. So what that actually refers to is the Greek word for a measuring stick is that same word, reed or canon, right? And so the idea is, how do we know that we've got the right measuring stick is really the study here, because the Bible is our measuring stick. And that word is used in our New Testament. It gets unfortunately translated out of some translations, but in Philippians chapter 3 and verse 16, let us walk by the same rule, same canon, same measuring stick. Let us mind the same thing. All right, anyway, so he's shown a man who's going to do some measurement. And then after being shown that man, he's told to pay attention to the man and what he does rather, and to make that known to Israel. And probably, oh, by the way, we didn't mention this, but the appearance of bronze, so he's kind of shining, and so this is probably like an angel, this vision. But anyway, verses 4 and 5.
Man, look with your eyes and hear with your ears, and set your heart upon all that I shall show you. For you were brought here in order that I might show it to you. Declare all that you see to the house of Israel. And behold, there was a wall all around outside of the temple area, and the length of the measuring reed in the man's hand was 6 long cubits, each being a cubit and a handbreadth in length. So he measured the thickness of the wall, 1 reed, and the height, 1 reed.
All right. Now, there is a little bit of a guilt trip in verse number 4. I should have forewarned you, because Ezekiel is told to fix your mind on everything I show you, and look with your eyes and hear with your ears. So a little bit of a guilt trip if we do skip these over, but that's the reading that comes next. We've got measurements. So you guys got to tell me, what are we doing here? We're reading it or not? Because I'm not going to try. I'll simply say this in overviewing this reading. There are definite like throwbacks to the temple, like like the palm imagery is something that is associated in that part of the world with fruitfulness. There were palm images that were a part of Solomon's temple. There are palm images that are part of this. There's little throwbacks to what the temple that Solomon built. There's definitely details that are different than the temple, but by and large, we're just being given blueprints and for the aim of trying to envision all of this, which I'll be honest, when I read this kind of stuff, I'm not a visual learner and I can't envision it. Like I get really confused really fast and trying to think about he's like this much and this much and that much and that, and like I lose it like 3 verses in. So, yeah, all right. So elder says to move on. So that's the authoritative word, and we will let that happen. So we just finished chapter 40. That was like super fast. All right. So there you go. And like I said, it continues. So in chapter 41, it opens up. The man is measuring the rooms and the furniture in the temple. Yeah. Oh, Samuel. Yep.
Significance. I don't know, is there significant numbers that show up in the dimensions that he gives, or is it really just a figurative city that has certain dimensions and there's not a whole lot tied to as far as like perfection or completeness or incompleteness?
We will ask. I'm going to ask the question in our. We will have discussion on this, and my plan is to ask the question about what is God doing with this, and so there are definitely. I wouldn't. I'll give, since you asked the question now, I'll go ahead and say I don't find any strong claims for numerology as such here. I mean, because like like you've got like what's the significance of like 20, like you see 25 and 50 and there's 8 steps. These are not typical numbers that come up in all of that. We're used to and used to multiples of 7 and all that kind of stuff. 12 and those are the kind of numbers that come up in typical things that where God seems to be portraying something with the numbers. I think that this is again maybe what characterized the people, what characterized people before there was TV and all that. Maybe people were a whole lot better at visualizing stuff than we are now. I don't know. So I tend to think that there's a strong desire for the people to be able to visualize this, but there's a reason why, as opposed to maybe the significance of the measurements.
Often in this reading, what, guard rooms?
Now,
temple
I wanted there to be something there. That's a New American Standard choice in translation. It's not Hebrew word. It's rooms. Like what? How does it read in different translations? So, like the chambers is how it's translated in New King James. Because I was looking for stuff like that. I was like, ooh, guard rooms. That there's something I can do with that. But then I was like, wait a minute, it's just New American Standard. Yeah, I mean, they're I guess, but you're gonna see that there's like especially like with the East Gate in particular, like there's like closing of that gate, and there's a significance to that, and exclusive use of it, and so it doesn't really fit the guards being there or that being emphasized. You'd have to ask the New American Standard translators why they chose that word, but they are pretty unique in doing so in the translations I checked. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It kind of does and kind of doesn't. And I know that's not a satisfying answer, but there's definite differences. And you can find and if it would be helpful, I did find a little like visualization of it. It doesn't have the dimensions, but to help you to be able to see what it looks like a little bit, if you'd like, I can print that off and bring it next time. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Larger.
I think. Yeah.
Bring some hope that we're getting something bigger and better than what was previously established.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting point to raise. So what are the inspired dimensions of Solomon's temple? That's a trick question, and why? What's that?
Sure, we know.
Well, maybe, we know some aspects of the measurements of it and layout of it and so on, but how did the temple come to be? We're gonna actually, this is a discussion question coming up later. How did Solomon's temple come to be? Did God ask for it? No, it's David wanted to build a house. Yeah, and what did God really mean by that? No, but what did God mean about your son's going to build a house? So this is all interesting stuff, and I want to plant seeds because I hope we can talk about this a little bit as we go on. But David wanted to build a house, and we all think that when God says your son's going to build a house, we immediately go Solomon. But you remember the text where that talks about that is one of the most quoted texts in the New Testament to refer not to Solomon, but to who? To Jesus. So Jesus is the real son of David that's going to build a house. And one passage, if we don't get there in our discussion tonight, and we may do, so you may only have a few minutes to think about it. But one passage that we're going to bring into the discussion is Stephen's sermon. All right. So you remember what the point that Stephen was leading up to. Yeah, like I said, we may get there, we may not, but if we don't, then be sure to look at Acts chapter 7 and Stephen's sermon as preparation. So, again, so to get back to the point, I think the second temple, or I mean the first temple rather, came about because people wanted it, and God honored what people wanted. But his initial instructions were to build what? A tabernacle. And so yes, when you're comparing the tabernacle dimensions, the inspired tabernacle dimensions, this is much more grand. Yeah, definitely.
Wasn't built during this time.
And again, the second temple does not follow this blueprint at all. Yeah.
The men who still remember the old one were actually
Weeping.
crying.
Yeah.
Nothing like
Right,
as grand
right.
as the old one.
Yeah. No, the second temple one doesn't follow this. Not even when Herod. So like, you know how they cry when they see the temple that they're building then. But you remember how like Matthew 24, you open up and like they're like walking through and Master, this is the temple, and like it's really nice. You know why that takes place, or why that conversation takes place? What happened between the second temple and that conversation in Matthew 24? Yeah, Herod renovated the temple and spent a lot of money expanding it and beautifying it and making it really, really pretty. So one of the, Herod had his flaws, but he really did want to be seen as a friend of the Jews in a lot of different ways, and obviously terrible flaws about what he did to the boys out of his desire to protect his throne in Israel. But at the same time, he put all this money into the temple, and it was a really beautiful structure as of that time. But even when Herod did what he did, it still doesn't match what Ezekiel is describing here. Herod didn't follow the blueprint either. So yeah. All right. Chapter 42 continues the theme with the man measuring the priest chambers and the circumference. And then basically, we're kind of given, if you were to get your tour, start at the east gate, going all the way around, and then when we get to chapter 43, we're back at the east gate again. Something significant going to happen in chapter 43. But those are those three chapters. So by all means, try to read through these. If you can find an image, and like if there's enough interest, I will print off a little kind of map that I found. But try to read through these. We don't want to just like dismiss all of this, but you really are just seeing measurements in these three chapters. And yeah. So any other questions, comments about them? All right, 3 chapters done. That's the only time we've ever done that, I think, in our study of the book of Ezekiel. But lessons, this is where we need to spend a little bit of time. So what might, and again, might, all right, because there are different thoughts, a lot of different thoughts that surround these 9 chapters, but think about just these 3. What might these intricate measurements and descriptions have meant to the captives first? Let's get on the ground there by the river Kibar, and let's hear Ezekiel say all this to us and think, what does that mean? There's a plan. Yeah, that's a good point. What do you think? What do you think that does for us when we think about the plan? Yeah. Yeah. In moments of crisis, everybody looks for somebody to have a plan. And there's definitely a lot of crisis when you've been uprooted from your whole life and livelihood and put into a slave camp. It's a plan. All right, what else?
for her. And yeah, you know. But if she ever comes to me and, okay, this is the blueprint, then it like, okay, this is really starting to come together now. She really knows
Yeah.
what this is gonna happen, so it's the same kind of thing where, you know, you're.
Yeah, there's a specific plan. That means something even more than, and in fact, there's a little catchphrase from Zig Ziglar that I always liked. You have to turn your wandering generalities into meaningful specifics. I always liked that. So, you know, it's not a wandering generality. We have a meaningful specific, as you said. This plan has real, you know, has you know, dimensions, and we know what it's all going to look like and all that. So yeah. What else?
Long-term.
Yeah.
We're building a structure, it's not, we're not camping in the wilderness, we're going back home.
Yeah.
Building our community back up, building
Yeah.
our nation back up. So we're going home.
That communicates something to people across culture. There's a reason why. I can't pretend to know the mind of God, but I suspect there's a reason why God let them have a temple as opposed to a tabernacle. One, you have to believe that the tabernacle by the time of David must have looked pretty ratty. Think about it's been hundreds of years since the wilderness. Were things replaced along the way? I mean, we're dealing with leather, like a leather tent. I don't know. I don't know what all was done to upkeep that structure over time. But I know that when David looked at it, he was like, I live here, worship here. It's like, you know, we value brick and mortar. You know, like that's the old saying about investments, right? And you know, brick and mortar investment. We value things that are real and tangible, and you know, are permanent. You know, it was the great tension that we had when we were, you know, meeting in Melbourne when I first moved over there. We were meeting in a school hall, and we knew that not having a regular location did send a message to the community as much as we didn't want it to, that this is a fly-by-night group. They're going to be here for a while and then they're going to be gone. There's something that we communicate when we say, okay, we're in this community and we're going to be here. You know, so like there is definitely something communicated by this, and the reason why, what really, like I said, with Solomon starts with David and Solomon's desire. There's a reason why God now says, let me show you how I honor your desire. I've got a plan and it's real, you know? So that I think there's a lot of power to that. What else? Any other thoughts? We've got a second is like unto it kind of question. Great deal of time is spent describing the walls and the gates. This obviously was not a focus in the tabernacle pattern. What does that say about this new temple? Walls and gates. Yeah, security. So even if even if I can't totally make the guardhouse point like I wanted to, or the guardroom point, I can still make the point that there's something said about the way that God is protecting all of this and surrounding all of this. So there's protection in this plan, and there's also provision in this plan, as we're going to see, because like I said, out underneath that temple comes a river that waters the countryside. We'll talk about that in the future. Any other thoughts about that? All right, one other question. As far as we're going to get to. What is the significance of God spending so much time and care describing the temple, given his thoughts and plans? So we maybe have given part of the answer, or maybe all of it, but let's see what you have to say, because I wanted to have a look at Stephen's sermon. And of all the times where you wish that they just hadn't interrupted, you know, because really, up until this point, it's just like a summary of history. You're reading, and he's like, you know, he's doing the Old Testament highlights. But then all of a sudden, as he's doing the Old Testament highlights, we get to this in chapter 7, verses 46 through 50. Someone read that for us.
of God and asked to find a dwelling place for the God of Jacob. But it was Solomon who built a house for him. Yet the Most High does not dwell in houses made by hands, as the prophet says. Heaven is my home, my throne, and the earth is my footstool. What kind of house will he build for me, says the Lord? For what is the place of my rest? Did not my hand make all these things?
Yeah. So where was he going to go in that sermon? Don't you wish that they must have interrupted, because in verse 51 he has to turn to them and say, "You stiff-necked and uncircumcised in hearts and ears, you always resist the Holy Spirit as your fathers did, so do you." So it's really sad that thought doesn't get fleshed out. But the Holy Spirit preserved it as it is because there's something here for us to think about, right? So what do you think? What do you think that was the point he was trying to make? And again, Stephen, I believe, speaking by inspiration, what is he trying to say here?
Yeah. God wanted to dwell in our hearts, not in a building.
Yeah.
All along, that's what he wanted.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're getting, but we're still getting him describing this physical temple in these 3 chapters. So someone merge those 2 things for me, and what lessons we learn about our God, and even yeah.
Yes, I mean, I see from early on, God really set down the specific rules and what he wanted from people. They were very tangible things.
Yeah.
When you look at the Newer Testament and look at the letters and the way that Christianity came across, you don't see anything really tangible. It's all in the heart, it's all in the spirit. So I kind of think he's using this maybe as a bridge to move the thoughts and the hearts from having something so solid to something that's more theoretical or spiritual, something that's not firmly able to be seen or felt.
Yeah, I do think maybe let's develop that point a little bit more. A God who is so specific about a temple that it isn't even his final intention to, that's not his goal. That's what this reading says to us. So what does that then say about me as I try to cultivate my life for God to dwell? Yeah, take care and be careful. Remember how this gets brought up, even from the standpoint of the tabernacle. What's brought up in Hebrews chapter 8? What did God say to Moses that's quoted there in Hebrews chapter 8? See that you make all things according to the pattern. So there's a carefulness in the way that God envisions all these things happening. And so maybe we should be careful about how we envision all this happening, because God returns in chapter 43. I'll go ahead and give you the end from the beginning here. God returns in chapter 43, but then in the chapters that follow, you have all of these things that are kind of highlighted as conditions for his return. And I think it's worth actually sitting down and thinking about all those conditions for his return as we think about, and we will. We'll kind of wait till we get to the end of all of that and kind of reflect upon all those lessons. The conditions for God to dwell amongst them then, what do they say to us as we try to be the people in whom God dwells now? That's I think there's good lessons that are going to come out of that. Any other thoughts, though, as we about yeah, so we will wrap up chapters 40 through 42 then, and we'll see if we can introduce chapter 43. Said we can move a little bit quicker through this section, but we'll still have some times where we'll slow down. So chapter 43 does come full circle. We got toured around the temple and the outer courtyard and all of that, and now we're brought back to where the vision begins, the east gate, and we're going to see something that's quite similar to what we saw when Jerusalem was destroyed, or at least in the prophetic vision of that happening. So Ezekiel 43, someone read the first 3 verses first.
The gate facing east And behold, the glory of God of Israel was coming from the east. And the sound of his coming was like the sound of many waters, and the earth shone with his glory. And the vision I saw was just like the vision that I had seen when he came to destroy the city, and just like the vision that I had seen by the Kibar Canal. And I fell on my face.
So just like, but obviously not just like in the way that in that vision he was leaving, but I think just like it's kind of like, what did the two angels say to the when you open up Acts chapter 1, what are the disciples doing? They're like staring up and then the angels, what do they say to kind of get them to, all right, let's get on with it here. What do they say? He's going to come back the same way. And so that's what's happening here. He's coming back the same way. But then what else is it connected with? The vision that he saw by the river Kibar. What is that one? That's chapter 1, right? So that's that glorious, amazing image of God that was shown in chapter 1. And so the two things merge, and now God is coming back in his glory and in his splendor. He comes to the east gate. One thing that I will point out, you have north, south, east gates in this temple, but you don't have a west gate. So why the east and why no west gate? I don't know that I can say 100% for sure I know why that is, but why do you think? What happens in the east? I know we're confused about that up here, but what usually happens in the east? Yeah, the sun rises in the east, and so light comes from the east. It's the beginning of light, and so God comes as the bringer of light. And what might be the little thought that we get from no west gate? Light never goes out, never goes away. Yeah, that, and as we're going to see, this east gate gets sealed up. Anyway, instead of departing, the glory of the Lord fills the temple in verses 4 and 5.
Temple by the gate facing east, the Spirit lifted me up and brought me into the inner court, and behold, the glory of the Lord filled the temple.
All right. So maybe that's a good place to pause. We were unsettled until now we know the Lord's back. But we're going to pick up and see, though the Lord is back, there are things that he expects of his people. And then there are also things that he tells them to continue this vision of hope. And so we'll talk about all that, Lord willing, next time.